Sharper than a serpent's tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 46. Lockpicking. I thought you said it was only going to be a couple of people. Apparently I lied. Era scowled at Hitoshi, shoving him in the shoulder when he didn't even look up from his phone. The by now familiar sight of Gym Upsilon was more crowded than she had ever seen, with classmates milling about on the track or sitting down to chat with their backs pressed against the walls. In all honesty, it wasn't that many people. There were only 20 kids in their class after all, and there were certainly a couple missing, but it was enough that Era couldn't keep them all in view at the same time, and that made her nervous. When she'd agreed to teach her classmates lockpicking, she expected Midoriya and Uraraka, maybe Kaminari and Ashido as well, since they'd expressed interest. Instead, as they let the door fall closed behind them, Era felt at least 15 pairs of eyes focus on her. This was a mistake, she muttered beneath her breath. Hitoshi chuckled, deftly splitting off to the side as everyone seemed to descend on her at once. Era! Thanks for doing this! I really appreciate it. I mean, it could be a really useful skill, you know? Midoriya dragged Uraraka, and Todoroki, of all people, along behind him. Era tried not to let herself glare at him, but his cool, disinterested gaze was making it difficult. Yeah, well, my pleasure, I guess, Era lied. Already she could tell this was going to be a nightmare. She wasn't a great teacher at the best of times. If she taught at all, it was by example, which was less intuitive with lockpicks than slamming someone into the ground over and over again. Let's all sit over here, I guess. As the group gathered in a circle on one of the training mats, she was struck again by how many of them there were. She'd only brought the picks she had, plus a few suitable practice locks she'd managed to scrape up from around her apartment. It seemed the entire class had shown up except Sato, Aoyama, Bakugou, and Ida. There was something concerning in that last absence, but she couldn't quite pin it. She hadn't expected Todoroki, certainly, and the hulking form of Shoji was also a surprise. Is that Yaoyorozu? Well, she guessed that made some amount of sense. She would be able to make her own picks and... Wait, actually, this was perfect. Hey, Yaoyorozu, how much do you know about locks? The girl looked up from where she sat a little ways across, brow furrowing in thought. I'm not sure. Why? Era pulled out one of her old, partially rusted padlocks, something she'd salvaged from the roof of her building long ago. Do you think you could make more of these? Yaoyorozu hesitated, and Era handed her the lock when she held her hand out for it. Probably. I mean, the chemical composition isn't too complicated, but I'm not completely solid on the internal mechanism. Era nodded, taking the lock back. If I took it apart and showed you, do you think you could do it? She blinked, seemingly taken aback. Oh, if you... Yes, I think I could do that. You know how? It's a lot easier to take things apart than to put them together. Era settled down, legs crisscrossed beneath her, and began laying out all of her various tools on a wrinkled piece of cloth. Basic lockpicks, of course, weren't difficult to come across, but she had a few other sets of rakes and tension tools in her collection, along with some more aggressive modes of attack, like drills and hammers. Dude! Do you have all of that on you all of the time? Asked Kaminari, scooting closer. Not all of it, but I usually keep the basics on me. This lock wasn't too complicated, but hopefully the mechanism wasn't too rusted over for Yaoyorozu to get a good look at it. She glanced up for a moment to find that everyone was just staring at her. Am I supposed to be talking? Is the lesson starting now? She cleared her throat awkwardly, trying to narrate as she worked. Okay, so I'm going to pick it open first, so I can start taking apart the core. This is a pretty simple padlock. You can tell it's just a basic design. 4 pins, no security pins. I could probably just rake this, honestly. Era slipped the tension tool in place and set to work with her pick, narration becoming a little scattered as she set about opening the lock. Honestly, if you come across this, I'd just suggest breaking off the shackle. It's so rusted that... Oh, and it's open. Anyway, like I was saying...
Wait!
Ashido rolled onto her back, hands waving in the air.
How do you do that?
Era stared back at her. It's not a very difficult lock.
Okay, but how?
I'm just going to take this apart now, and we can get into that later. God, she was in way over her head. Era swiftly disassembled the lock with her screwdriver, trying to explain to a blessedly patient and attentive Yaoyorozu how all of the inner mechanisms fit together. At last, the girl nodded and placed her hand against her arm. I think I understand. Could you tell me if this is right? Era watched transfixed, as Yaoyorozu materialized a near-identical lock in a dazzling weave of chemical compounds, all neatly interlaced into a shining piece of metal. She had, thankfully, forgone the rust of the original. Accepting the lock with a smile, Era quickly picked it open and found that the mechanisms inside was practically the same as well. That's incredible. You have a good eye for this kind of thing. Yaoyorozu shuffled uncomfortably at the praise. Honestly, I should have known how to make them already. I probably could have worked it out on my... Era shook her head, cutting her off. No, there are a lot of moving parts. Being able to take one look and recreate it like that is something to be proud of. Before Yaoyorozu could stammer out anything else, Ashido rolled onto her stomach and let out a high-pitched whine.
Suzuki! I thought we were gonna pick locks! Stop flirting with Momo and show us already!
Era blinked. What? I wasn't...
Come on!
Era sighed, holding up the new padlock and shooting Yaoyorozu an apologetic look. Could you make more of these? Like, a lot more. She graciously did as requested, and soon enough everyone had a padlock and a basic set of lockpicks. Era worked them through the process as best as she could, but some were a lot more intuitive at it than others. Shoji in particular picked it up quickly, as did Jiro, perhaps assisted by their heightened senses. Yaoyorozu was also a fast study, though that wasn't surprising given that she now had a pretty good understanding of how the lock was supposed to work. And, of course, Midoriya figured it out almost instantly. And it seemed like Hagakure and Koda already knew how to pick locks.
Oh yeah, I got into all sorts of trouble when I was younger,
said Hagakure when Era asked her about it. It was fascinating to watch as the pick appeared to hover in midair, slowly working through the lock.
Invisible, you know, but I just like hanging out with you guys, and this sounded like fun.
Koda just shrugged, silent as ever. When Era didn't move on to another topic of conversation, he blushed slightly, ducked his head, and dropped the lock to pull out his phone, typing frantically into the Notes app before holding it up for her to see.
Sometimes animals get in trouble.
Oh, okay. She wrinkled her nose, unsure of how to proceed. Do you know sign? His eyes widened and he nodded excitedly, raising his hand to sign.
Yes. Do you?
Yes. Do you not have a translator in class? Asked Era with a frown. Koda ducked his head again.
I don't need one. Sensei understands, and I can use this app. I have...
At this, he signed something that Era didn't understand. She wrinkled her nose and he hastily continued.
I can speak sometimes, but usually not.
Does anyone else know sign? Era asked, dismissing the pang of guilt at the selfishness of that question. It was useful to know who could potentially overhear her if she chose to speak to someone that way.
Yaoyorozu, Jiro, Shoji, Todoroki maybe? I think Shinsou a little.
It was a little tedious to wade through the fingerspelling of all the names, but the last one did give her pause. Shinsou? Yeah, I know some sign, said Hitoshi. Era tensed slightly, frowning when he laughed. What? You guys are having a conversation right in front of us.
Sorry,
signed Koda, expression turning sheepish.
Don't worry about it,
Ashido exclaimed as if on reflex, more focused on her padlock than anything else.
Suzuki, I think I almost have this. Can you please? Ugh.
Era sighed. Be patient with it. You just have to feel the pins fall into place. She bit back a grin when Kirishima let his drop to the ground with a groan. If you think this is hard, try dealing with false gates and security pins.
How did you do it so fast?
Grumbled Kaminari, brow deeply furrowed with concentration.
This is impossible! This is literally impossible!
His padlock clicked open. I did it! Ashido let out an ungodly screech.
I'm never gonna get this! I'll just have to kick the door down.
Kirishima snorted, the lockpick slipping out of his hands. That's pretty much what Bakugou said. Oh, really? I was wondering why he didn't show. Sero had already managed to pick his lock open once, but was seemingly struggling to do it a second time. Yeah, something about how he could just blast them off the door if he needed to. Kachan already knows how to pick locks, said Midoriya simply, looking up from where he was practicing with one of the rakes. He learned when we were a lot younger. Kirishima gaped at him, padlock forgotten. What? But he said... Wouldn't want to admit to anything that subtle, muttered Era. Also, I doubt he'd want to learn anything from me. Would you learn how to do this, Suzuki? Asked Todoroki from where he sat between Midoriya and Yaoyorozu. He wasn't even pretending to work through the padlock. Ass. The internet? He narrowed his eyes. The internet? Yeah. Got a problem with that?
Ooh! Are you guys still like rivals?
Hagakure leaned forward. Or, at least, Era assumed she did, based on how her clothing shifted.
Is this a sports festival thing?
Midoriya was looking between the two of them oddly. Did something happen? Neither of you seem like the type to hold a grudge, especially over a friendly contest. That last match had been anything but friendly. But Era didn't bother pointing that out. Nothing happened. Todoroki's just— I think Suzuki's hiding something, said Todoroki plainly, crossing his arms when she shot him the most exasperated look she could muster. Seriously? Of course she is, Hitoshi said, like the traitor he was. Era's constantly hiding things. Personally, I think she's secretly a drug lord. I'm not a fucking drug lord. Defensive. I'm not a fucking— She can't be a drug lord, Todoroki insisted. She'd have more money if she was. Half the classroom winced, and the other half was too engrossed in their padlocks to pay attention. Todoroki? Said Midoriya delicately. You can't really— No, he's right. Era pulled around her ratty backpack, pointing out the tears in the seams. If I were a drug lord, I wouldn't be using this piece of shit. Hitoshi hummed thoughtfully, a grin playing at his lips. Fine, disgraced crime boss then. What have I done to suggest that? Jiro gestured to the lockpick in her hand. Being able to pick locks doesn't make me a criminal. If Todoroki wasn't the only one taking this conversation seriously, Era might swear she was about to have a heart attack. As it was, she felt a vague sort of nausea tug at her gut, before firmly wrapping it up in a box. This was just normal, friendly banter. She could do that. She could be normal. Tokoyami placed his padlock down, feathers ruffling slightly. I knew I sensed a kindred darkness within you. You're making me blush. Era deadpanned. I thought we were here to pick locks, not examine my obviously criminal past. And she admits it. Sarcasm, Todoroki. Please learn it. Wait, am I missing something here? Asked Kaminari. Jiro snorted. Probably. Hey, I'm just vibing here. No need to get hurtful. But seriously, why is Suzuki a criminal? Jiro held up a lockpick once more. Again with this. There's also the fact that she's constantly armed, muttered Hitoshi. The fucking traitor. Whose side was he on? How did he even know that? I am not. Really? Tell me there isn't a knife in your shoe right now. How do you know about that? Hitoshi shrugged, looking back at his phone. After the first time you pulled a knife on me, I started paying more attention. Era winced. Fair enough.
Wait, what?
Squeaked Uraraka.
She pulled a knife on you?
It was quite a bonding experience, said Hitoshi dryly. Would you all like a reenactment, or— Please let it go. Era dragged a hand across her face. Please, just let it go. It was one time. I apologized. Do you know how rare that is for me? I'm well aware. And the plot thickens, muttered Todoroki, as if to himself. Era groaned.
Oh!
Exclaimed Ashido, waving her hand in the air.
She also knows how to use a gun! That's another one!
Asi tapped a finger against her chin thoughtfully.
She was pretty ruthless in the sports festival. Get up.
That wasn't ruthless. If they really thought that was bad, she dreaded a scenario in which they ran into actual villains. Although, she supposed they already had, with the USJ and all. What an unfortunate bunch of kids.
Dude, you electrocuted Asui,
said Kaminari.
Straight up shocked her in the tongue.
then body slammed her into the ground, and that's not even mentioning the fight with Todoroki. What even happened there? Both Era and Todoroki stiffened, glancing at each other uncomfortably. After a few seconds, Era cleared her throat. How much of that fight could you guys actually see? She asked delicately, painfully aware of how almost everyone present was staring at her with keen interest. Kaminari shrugged.
It was kind of foggy. It was hard to see anything.
There was blood, said Shoji. Because of course. His quirk enhanced every single one of his senses. There was no way he didn't see something. You put down a smoke bomb. You shot Todoroki a few times with your paintball gun. Or at least I think you did. He was covered in paint afterward. And then Todoroki used his fire to clear away the smoke. You fought a little, used another smoke bomb. I think Todoroki hit you with his ice, and that's where the blood came from? Oh, yeah. There was that huge attack. It kind of poked out of the smoke for a minute, said Jiro. I definitely saw some blood. You got hit by that and kept fighting? That's pretty badass. It just nicked me, Era muttered. The blood made it look worse than it was. Todoroki stared directly at her, and Era prayed to any higher power that might exist on this cruel world that he would keep his mouth shut for once. You were impaled. God fucking damn it. She laughed, pleased that it didn't come out all twisted. Again, lots of mist, lots of blood. Also, you took a pretty severe knock to the skull at the end there. No, you were—
I did it!
Ashido whooped, waving her open padlock around her head like a trophy.
Suzuki! Suzuki, look! I did it!
Good job? Ashido groaned, flopping onto the ground.
You're just as bad as Aizawa-sensei,
she grumbled.
I did it!
Look, I've been doing this for a while. Good job. Call me when you crack a safe. Hitoshi gestured towards her wildly. Criminal. You are a criminal. You're making some bold accusations for someone who knows I can break into his house. Wait, what?
Isn't it a lot harder to break into a house than just picking this?
Asked Uraraka, pointing at her open lock.
I mean, there are alarms and stuff too.
A house lock is probably not as secure as you'd like to think. Era leaned back on her hands, staring up at the rope's course stretching around the roof, and feeling her fingers begin to twitch with a memory of lockpicks and security bypasses. I know I could pick it. Alarms are a little trickier, but depending on the system, there are definitely ways to get past them. Sometimes upper story windows don't have alarms, and you can usually shim open a window lock from the outside if you're smart about it. They were all staring at her. Again. Bro, said Kirishima. You are so cool. Kaminari laughed nervously. Wait, I don't feel safe anymore. Does anyone else suddenly feel really unsafe? I'm never trusting my locks again. I'm gonna stay up all night with a flashlight. Era snorted. Yeah, like that'll help you. Jiro snickered, and Hagakure cackled. Is this a threat? Stammered Kaminari. Am I being threatened? Don't worry, said Era simply, easing her restless energy by attempting to pick the lock open with one hand. Just having a lock and a functioning alarm is usually enough of a deterrent. There are easier marks. Hitoshi narrowed his eyes. I honestly can't tell if you're being serious or just going along with the joke. What joke? Era smiled sweetly. The lock sprang open. I'm a hardened criminal, remember? Hey, can I just say, for the record, I do not like this, said Sero, unable to mask the laugh in his voice. Also, did you just open that with one hand? Era shrugged. It's a neat party trick.
Oh my god!
Ashido clapped her hands together excitedly, her padlock seemingly forgotten.
That reminds me! We totally need to have a party! Like, come on! It'll be so fun! And we need to welcome Shinsou and Suzuki, right?
Yayorozu looked up from whatever she was reading on her tablet with a soft smile. That does sound fun. I'd be happy to host if you'd like. Perhaps we could have a sleepover? That sounded like the exact opposite of fun. Era had never had a sleepover, but she was familiar with the concept. Exposing yourself to a potential attack all night sounded more stressful than anything else. She trusted Hitoshi, yes, and maybe Uraraka, Asui, and Midoriya, but everyone else? Yes! Kirishima pumped his fist into the air. We gotta do some bonding! That's totally manly. It should probably wait until after internships, though, said Tokoyami. Otherwise, it's a little too short notice. Ashido nodded fervently.
Yeah, totally! But after, we're going to party hard. There will be snacks, there will be movies, the girls will braid each other's hair.
Hitoshi snorted. Most of you don't have hair long enough to braid. You'd be better off braiding the boys' hair.
Shinsou, you are a genius!
Wait, no, that's not what
There's no escape from the braid train!
Hitoshi turned to Era with pleading eyes. Era, help. She looked back at him, expression devoid of any sympathy. You hurt her, Hitoshi. There's no escape from the braid train.
Oh, wait!
Exclaimed Ashido. And how did she have this much energy? Was she like this all the time? It sounded exhausting.
Tokoyami, where are you going for your internship?
Oh. Tokoyami ducked his head a little, feathers ruffling. I'm actually interning with Hawks. Era raised a brow. Hawks? Like number 3 hero Hawks? The same. That's so cool, dude! Said Kirishima, as Jiro gave a low whistle. Era wasn't inclined to agree. She'd interacted with Hawks once, back when he was still more of a fledgling hero, and the Commission's leash on him had been even tighter. And the fact that she'd survived was, frankly, incredible. Hopefully, she'd never have to repeat that experience. The thought of his obnoxious red plumage still made her shudder.
I'm interning with Mirko!
Ashido crowed.
It's gonna be so cool! I'm so excited!
Mirko. She was an up-and-comer, though thankfully Era had never seen her in action. When she had been doing her job right, there'd been no need for heroes to get involved. Unless the hero was the target, in which case, better to get the job done quickly before the fight broke out. She was more personally familiar with a few underground heroes, but given the turnover rate on those, she doubted many were still kicking around.
I'm interning with Gunhead,
said Uraraka, throwing an experimental punch into the air.
I want to get better with hand-to-hand. Like you, Ojiro.
Ojiro laughed sheepishly, rubbing a hand at the back of his neck. Thanks, Uraraka. I'm sure you'll do great. But, Suzuki's pretty good at martial arts too. And there it was. Again with the eyes on her. I'm nothing special. Yeah. Okay. Hitoshi scoffed. Sure. Where are you interning to? She asked hastily. Luckily, Aussie didn't question the sudden topic change.
Oh, I'm interning with Silky. He's a rescue hero. He and his ship work with the Coast Guard. What about you?
Era and I are interning with Aizawa-sensei, said Hitoshi. Something about preparing us for the hero course. Ashido's face twisted into an overdramatic grimace. Oof, said Kaminari. Good luck with that. He's not that bad, said Era. Honestly, he's not even that strict. Hitoshi stared at her, as did the rest of the class. He made us run for half an hour when we were late. That's not strict.
He expelled someone on the first day!
Shouted Hagakure.
And he expelled his entire class last year!
Era snorted. Okay. Have any of you experienced any actual consequences? I've gotten detention like 5 times, groused Kaminari. Era stared at him. And what do you do in detention? I don't know. You have to sit there, do work, not talk to anyone. It's torture. She felt her eye twitch. Okay, that's also not strict. And that's not a consequence. Seriously, I don't understand why you're all so afraid of him. He hasn't done anything to earn it.
He's scary,
Ashido whined.
When he uses his quirk, his eyes flash all red.
I don't understand. You're afraid of him because his quirk makes him look moderately intimidating? No, said Sero defensively. He's also... you've met the guy. He's so strict. He isn't, Era insisted. He even complimented you all on the sports festival.
That wasn't a compliment,
Ashido objected.
He barely said anything.
He literally said, I want to congratulate you on your performance. How is that not a compliment? She's got a point, said Jiro dryly.
No, she doesn't. He is scary.
Hagakure's torso moved in a way that suggested she was flailing her arms about. What would a real consequence be to you, Suzuki? Asked Todoroki. Era paused, considering him warily, but the question seemed innocent enough. She shrugged. I don't know. He hasn't hurt anyone, right? Not even a little bit? And Era didn't have a fantastic grasp on what constituted normal punishment, but she was pretty sure solitary confinement wasn't on the list. Pain she could endure, but the quiet, the loneliness, the dark. She'd rather be able to feel something than nothing. It was like her mind was eating itself from the inside out, eyes pressing shapes against the shadows until they coiled around her skin, squeezing in from all sides. Eyes on her. In a box. Stop staring at me, she snapped. Dude, began Kaminari, wincing before falling silent once more. Asi picked up the slack.
Have your previous teachers hurt you, kiddo?
Great. Great. She must have made a mistake, as usual. Constantly fucking up. No, it's just an example.
Did your...
Todoroki? Said Era, unable to help the wariness in her voice. Where are you interning? His expression didn't waver.
Endeavor.
To her surprise, Midoriya spoke at the same time as her.
What?
He shrugged.
If I'm using my fire now, the best person to learn from would be my father.
Your father is an asshole. He shrugged again, as Kirishima winced.
Hey, Suzuki, my dude, you probably shouldn't... No, she's right,
said Todoroki.
It doesn't matter, though. Okay?
Todoroki? Said Midoriya, an intensity to his voice that wasn't there before. Are you sure about this?
Yes.
Bullshit. That was such fucking bullshit. Even as the conversation turned to something more inane, Era couldn't stop fucking thinking about it, about the consequences, about how monumentally stupid you would have to be to willingly go back to the dark and the... He was an asshole, but she couldn't let him do that, could she? Aizawa hadn't presented himself as a threat in the same way Endeavor hadn't made obvious that capacity for violence that she had seen in the hallway beneath the sports festival. She'd felt it. Felt the searing heat of his flames and his anger. Felt it burn and bubble at her flesh. He was a threat, and Todoroki knew that more intimately than anyone else. When at last everyone began to head home, citing homework, dinner, or some other commitment, Era managed to corner Todoroki before he left. We're going to talk. Now. Todoroki just stared down at her bemusedly.
Oh, are you going to confess?
Era felt a growl rumble in her throat, barely containing it when she noticed both Hitoshi and Midoriya lingering behind. There's nothing to confess, but we are going to talk. Alone. She glanced towards Hitoshi with a friendly smile. Hey, you can go on ahead. I need to talk to Todoroki about something real quick. He eyed her suspiciously, before sighing and walking out the door. Fine. See you tomorrow. Try not to die. I always do. Midoriya was still hovering, tugging at his backpack straps. You guys are talking about Endeavor? This doesn't concern you, Midoriya. Era tried to not let her voice turn icy, but there was still a sharpness to it that she couldn't dull. Midoriya flinched, before seeming to steel himself, straightening to his full height and meeting her in the eye. Actually, yes, it does. Todoroki told me about everything and... He seemed to falter slightly. Well, it's Todoroki's choice whether or not I stay, isn't it? Not yours. Era bristled, but Todoroki just shrugged.
You can stay if you want, Midoriya. I don't care.
Visibly relaxing, he walked over to them. Oh, okay, thank you. Fine. Era snapped her attention back towards Todoroki. What the fuck do you think you're doing?
Interning with my father.
Endeavor is an asshole, Era hissed. You hate him. He's an asshole. He hurt you. Why would you do this? Are you a masochist? Todoroki stared at her coldly.
I don't see why this is your business.
Because we care about you, Todoroki, said Midoriya. Era just scoffed. Because you're making a mistake, she growled. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this isn't the way to go about it.
It's my father's agency, not a war zone.
Your Era cut herself off with a sharp hiss. Endeavor isn't going to change just because you're using your fire now.
He's a good hero. He's number 2 in the country.
That doesn't mean shit. He might be a good hero, but he's a fucking garbage. He's a shit person, Todoroki. After everything you've told me about him, Midoriya said a little more gently, I don't understand why you'd want to intern with him. Todoroki sighed.
I wouldn't expect you to understand. It's complicated.
Era snarled. How fucking dare you? You don't know shit about me, except the stupid fucking conspiracy theories you've come up with. Why don't you try me?
Wasn't it you who said that if I don't accept this part of myself, I'll end up dead? I'm just doing what you told me to do.
Do not! Era cut herself off with a strangled noise, breathing and starting again. Do not put this on me, Todoroki. That's not what I meant, and you know it. You aren't your father. It's your quirk, said Midoriya. I understand if you want to learn from him, but don't feel like you have to accept him.
If I want to be a hero, there's a lot I need to catch up on. He's the number 2 hero, and the most knowledgeable about that side of my quirk. It's the correct decision.
Is it? Or are you just punishing yourself for something? Todoroki stared at Era.
What?
If you're doing this because you genuinely think it's best for you, then fine. I can't stop you. It's stupid, but I can't... I just don't understand. Do you think you deserve it? Because you don't. Era deserved it, and even she had fled in the end. Even if that made her a coward, if it meant she was too selfish to let them fix her, she still ran the moment she saw her opportunity. She always did. Nyx called her a fighter. Vulcan had called her an obnoxious little brat. Were they okay? Did they suffer because of her? Was she okay with that? Focus.
Suzuki.
Todoroki's head tilted slightly to the side.
Are your parents pros?
Era snorted. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was working with the League of Villains. What? Exclaimed Midoriya with a start.
It could be both. You're not answering the question.
Wait, can we back up a little bit? You're the one who wanted to be involved in this conversation, Midoriya, said Era with a sharp grin. No, Todoroki, my parents aren't pros. Are you satisfied with that?
No,
he said simply.
Why did they hurt you then?
What? Can we please? Midoriya spluttered, but Era cut him off. Violence isn't exclusively limited to the children of pro heroes. Now leave it.
No, they did, didn't they? You're different from...
I'm well-trained, yes, and apparently so are you, Era spat. Otherwise, why would you run back to him like a fucking dog? She saw the fist coming, But to his credit, it was far less telegraphed than most. Not that it mattered. Era let it slam across her jaw, let herself stumble to the side, let the pain blossom fast and fierce against her cheek as she grinned back at a trembling Todoroki. "I'm sorry, did I strike a nerve?" He breathed. He settled, and Era hated seeing those familiar motions mirrored on his face. She wished he'd just punch her again. That would be so much easier than this fucking dance. "Stop doing that." Her smile widened, showing teeth. "Whatever do you—"
Era, are you okay?"
Midoriya finally seemed to catch his breath again, wavering between the two of them uncertainly.
"I mean, oh God, I don't know what—"
He paused, brow furrowing. "You wanted him to hit you." "You are unnervingly observant. Did you know that?" Midoriya laughed nervously.
"Yeah, Kachan always calls it creepy."
"Bakugou is an idiot. It's a valuable skill." "Stop changing the subject," snapped Todoroki, and Era could feel the faintest chill as it blistered along his skin. "I don't understand why you... Do you want to fight again? You'll lose." "Interesting hypothesis. Care to test it out?"
"Please don't fight right now,"
said Midoriya.
"That's not going to solve anything."
Era scoffed. "I strongly disagree. That will solve everything. Winner's correct about this whole fucking mess."
"No! You can't just resolve a conflict by punching each other about it!"
"Oh, says you!" snapped Era. "That's like your whole thing."
"What?"
said Midoriya indignantly.
No, it's not. I do more than just punch things."
"Yeah, sure. You flick them too."
"Stop trying to pick fights! Why are you so uncomfortable with talking this out?"
"This is why I didn't want him here," muttered Era. Midoriya was far too adept at picking up on subtle cues, and yet absolutely oblivious about whether or not it was acceptable to share those discoveries. The worst possible combination. "He has a point," Todoroki sighed, the cold dissipating slightly. "I don't want to fight you, Suzuki." "Liar." "Although I'll admit that you make that very difficult sometimes," he continued, temperature plummeting once more before evening out. "I think I understand why you're so upset, and I appreciate the concern, even though it's unnecessary." "I'm not concerned," scoffed Era. "I just think it's fucking stupid." "And I think you're letting your personal experiences interfere with your reaction." Era growled, tugging a hand through her hair as she puzzled over how to convince him how much of a mistake this was. "My personal experiences have nothing to do with this." "If you say so. Still, it's my decision, and I've already made it." "It's not just your decision." Both of them stared at her, and she bristled under their attention. "What do you mean by that?" asked Midoriya. It was Todoroki's business whether or not he wanted to go back to that bastard, that monster. She hated him, she fucking hated him. She wouldn't go back. Never again. She couldn't... Breathe. Doesn't matter. Don't come crying to me when it blows up in your face.
Era, wait!
She pushed past Midoriya, shaking off his hand when it fell upon her arm, and ignoring the grasping, twitching, tearing, get it off, get it off, get it.
What do you think is going to happen? Asked Todoroki.
And why the fuck did he always have to sound so sincere? It took every ounce of willpower not to whirl around and scream, to swallow the spitting curses that festered in her ribcage, and calmly turn to face him. Exactly what always happens, Todoroki.
You don't know my father. You can't change what you are, little bird.
I know what he is.
And what is that?
Era felt her throat constrict around the words, felt her mind struggle to spin her wretched emotion into something comprehensible. She couldn't hate him. She wasn't allowed to hate him, because even that couldn't belong to her. He was just there. A constant presence that lurked at the edges of thought, twisting her limbs up in strings of dreams and nightmares and all too real suffering, until she couldn't fucking move unless it was by his design. But she couldn't hate him. Era couldn't feel things like that. Endeavor, though. Endeavor was new. A fresh wound that blistered against the inside of her skin. When she looked at Endeavor, she saw him. She saw how the hero laid claim to Todoroki like some kind of prize, like some kind of toy, like some kind of weapon that he had molded. Endeavor didn't own her, and he never would. She was allowed to hate Endeavor. So she would, because she had to, because it felt right. It felt so right to finally own that anger she'd never been allowed before. She would pour all of her spite, her hate, her spitting rage into Endeavor, and it would be enough. It had to be enough. He's a piece of shit, she said at last. If I ever have the displeasure of meeting him again, I'm going to punch that smug look of his ugly fucking face.
And I'd film it, said Todoroki dryly. However, that doesn't change my mind. I'm interning with him. That's my decision.
Era snarled incoherently, tugging at the knots in her hair just as she desperately tried to untangle the matted threads of her thoughts. She couldn't let him do this. He can't do this to me. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. Why did he have to go and fuck it all up? She hated Endeavor. She was allowed to hate Endeavor, and so was he. And didn't he see that? He needed to hate Endeavor. Not go crawling back to him with some foolish conception of mercy and study. No. Endeavor was going to make him suffer, just like he always had, because that was what he was. That was all he was. He'd take Todoroki, and he'd twist and bend and snap until he had the thing he'd always wanted. A prize, a tool, a toy, a weapon, a thing.
A thing. That's all you are, little. Breathe.
She did. In a box. She did. with some difficulty.
Breathe.
Again. And again. And again. Short of knocking Todoroki unconscious and stowing him away somewhere, which, however amusing the prospect might be, was unsustainable at best, Era couldn't stop him. These were the facts, and though they were cruel, had always been cruel, Era would have to learn to live with them. "Give me your number," she said calmly. Todoroki blinked at her sudden change in demeanor.
What?
"If you're actually going to do this, don't leave me in the dark. Give me your number." Midoriya slowly began to nod. "That's a good idea. We should all exchange numbers. That way if something happens—"
Nothing is going to happen,
Todoroki huffed.
My father is a bastard, but I'm not exactly a helpless child anymore. He's not going to do anything that would be difficult to hide.
Something burned at the back of Era's throat, and she thrust out her battered phone as desperation rasped her voice. "Please, Todoroki. I know you don't like me, but please just do this for me. I won't call you, I won't message you, you don't need to talk to me at all. I just need to know that you can." He stared down at her proffered phone, before accepting it with a heavy sigh.
Fine. I don't understand why you're so bothered by this, but if it will get you off my back, then fine.
They all exchanged numbers, Midoriya messaging them both with a cheerful "Hello" in a group chat that she was sure they were never going to use. As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, Era felt that awful weight pressing against her ribcage lessen somewhat. It wasn't banished entirely, but it was something, she supposed.
So,
said Todoroki, putting his phone away as well.
Are you going to admit?
Era hastily about-faced, marching towards the exit. Yeah, okay. Goodbye, Todoroki. Nice chat as always. Midoriya, good luck with whatever your internship is.
Your denial only further proves my point,
called Todoroki after her, but she was already halfway out the exit. That's not how that works, she snapped back, letting the door fall shut behind her with a grimace. Shit. She pulled out her phone again, staring at that message from Midoriya, at the new number added to her contact list. Scowling, she jabbed at the buttons and set Todoroki's name to the coldest take. Just another fucking thing to worry about. Idiot. As if she didn't have enough problems with Aizawa-sensei and the fact that her goddamn face was plastered all over the internet. Era sighed, scratching at a spot beneath her ear. As always, she'd just have to burn that bridge when she got to it. Hopefully, she'd manage a week without some horrible catastrophe or another. Although given her track record, she was starting to think that that was too big of an ask. End of chapter 46.